And right here, we never took out that low. So technically, you still have a higher low. As long as that holds, you could make a case that, okay, this was a pullback waiting for the spot ETF news. Maybe it can retest that 31 to 32,000 level.
Hey guys, welcome back to Everyday Finance. In this video, Gareth Soloway discusses about Bitcoin and crypto market. Gareth Soloway says, you have to get very nervous now. I think that the spot ETF news is going to be a net and positive for Bitcoin. My biggest fear for Bitcoin is that the Nasdaq, if the economy slows down like I think it is, the Nasdaq has the potential for 20 to 30, maybe 40% downside. And how does Bitcoin hold up in spite of that right? So if you told me the Nasdaq was going to drop 30%, whereas Bitcoin, I would dare say it's a lot lower than it is now, because people will be running for cover in all risk assets. And like you mentioned, it's still generally a risk asset. So for me, at least, I'm very cautious here. Doesn't mean I'm not slightly long here and there for swing trades. But I want to see what happens if the Nasdaq starts to fall. We know the Magnificent Seven have started, and I just want to show you this chart. This is a big deal here to me, and I apologize for going into this stuff. But if we go to our weekly chart of the Nasdaq, look at what's happened here. So I basically drew arrows showing the .com era and what the formation was, and look at what we have here. So this was a lot smaller because you didn't have as much quantitative easing in the mix and the coveted money, but you had this big move up, then a pullback, then an epic bounce, and then the big .com collapsed well. And lots of things Gareth Soloway discuss, so please watch the video to end and share, subscribe our channel Everyday Finance. Thanks.
No, I think you're highly correct on that, is that most investors in Bitcoin are hanging their hat on the approval of a spot ETF. We've heard even of filings for a spot Ethereum ETF by ARK, and I think there was one other player. But there's no doubt that investors are. My bigger concern, and by the way, right now, if you're a bull on Bitcoin, you're hanging in there, and I'm going to tell you why. Because we came down, and it was nasty that we did come down here, but we never took out the low from June, mid-June. And so what you have is you have a low, a higher low, higher low, higher low. And right here, we never took out that low. So technically, you still have a higher low. As long as that holds, you could make a case that, okay, this was a pullback waiting for the spot ETF news. Maybe it can retest that 31 to 32,000 level. If, on the other hand, we break this level, which is around 24,700 and change, and you make a lower low, technically that breaks the uptrend of higher lows, and you have to get very nervous. Now, I think that the spot ETF news is going to be a net positive for Bitcoin. My biggest fear for Bitcoin is that the Nasdaq, if the economy slows down like I think it is, the Nasdaq has potential for 20 to 30, maybe 40% downside. And how does Bitcoin hold up in spite of that, right? So if you told me the Nasdaq was going to drop 30%, where is Bitcoin? I would dare say it's a lot lower than it is now, because people will be running for cover in all risk assets. And like you mentioned, it's still generally a risk asset. So for me, at least, I'm very cautious here. Doesn't mean I'm not slightly long here and there for swing trades, but I want to see what happens if the Nasdaq starts to fall. We know the Magnificent Seven have started. And I just want to show you this chart. This is a big deal here to me, and I apologize for going into this stuff. But if we go to our weekly chart of the Nasdaq, look at what's happened here. So I basically drew arrows showing the .com era and what the formation was, and look at what we have here. So this was a lot smaller because you didn't have as much quantitative easing in the mix and the COVID money, but you had this big move up, then a pullback, then an epic bounce, and then the big .com collapse. Well, if you look over here in the recent history of this market, it's the exact same formation. And that is very alarming to me because of what happened with the .com collapse and how it kind of played out. So again, these are pattern formations. It doesn't mean it's going to absolutely repeat. But when you look at this stuff, you have to say, this could be something that could play out. There's a probability in there, and it has to be taken seriously by investors. It usually does. I mean, again, you have two types of tops. This one was a lower top with a rollover after a big bounce. It convinces all the people to go bullish again. Or then you have the other scenario, which is the M top, which is the double top with a slightly higher high, which was the Bitcoin 2021 top. And then we know what happened there. So either way, it's not a good scenario, whether we go to double top and hit that high, which means we go back and make a new all-time high, or if we roll over here, they're both a negative scenario for the overall stock market. Yep, exactly. That's exactly what it is. And just so everyone's aware, the psychology behind this is really important because you had the high at 65,000 and we actually broke above that high in the second top. The reason that happens is because the markets have this tendency to want to flush out stops. So think about if you're short, you're probably putting your stop right at that high because if it breaks out, everyone was saying it was going to go to 100,000. It broke out, stopped all of the bears out. And then anyone who was on the sidelines and like pseudo bullish, once they broke that top, it gets everyone to jump long. And so it kind of gets everyone max offsides on the trade, which then enables that bigger rollover to happen. It's amazing if you get into the mindset of trading and investing. That's definitely an option. To me, that's a very high risk option because your downside, if it doesn't happen, is so massive, like we saw in Bitcoin, like we saw in the .com era. But again, it's just a matter of your risk tolerance. For me, I'm always someone who likes to buy low. I don't want to chase and buy near the highs, just hoping for that next little blip. To me, that's like a meme coin or meme stock play where you're hoping to sell it to someone else real quick. I'm never that fast. No, it doesn't, right? Fear and panic are the number one factors in the market, right? So emotion controls all of us, you, me, everyone else. When people get fearful, they're going to dump in panic. When people get greedy, they're going to buy and just FOMO in essentially. And so you do have this disconnect between fundamentals. And we saw that in the .com era. We saw that in the crypto markets in 2021 and even the stock market. The key is this, and this is what's important about Bitcoin, is that what you're seeing, the grayscale news, the Ripple news, all these filings for spot ETFs. Those are all really good fundamental stories that Bitcoin, that are good for Bitcoin. The key is this: fundamentals play out over the long period. It's like building a base. It's like planting a seed. That tree will grow. It's going to take time. Technicals are much more short-term based on emotion. And so short-term technicals rule, long-term, it eventually reverts back to that fundamentals. So it depends on where it is in the cycle, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with going with the trend. The tricky thing is, at what point are you getting in? Are you getting in at Bitcoin at 67,000 before it tops out, and then you're looking for 100K, and then you're holding the bag down to 30,000 or 15.5? And I think that's the tricky thing, is like, for me, I'm much more of a support. I want to buy at support and sell into resistance. And I try to gauge human emotion, and I go opposite this, right? So when you see that euphoria, it's a warning sign. I have these red flashing lights in my head that go off. And same thing when there's blood in the streets, as many famous investors have said, when everyone else is freaking out, you have to be the logical person and say, well, what are the fundamentals here? Does this make sense? And that's usually when you want to counter what you said and not say it's had a rough second half. Now, is it net negative for the half? Yes, but only by a couple percentage points. And I think this is remarkable, right? So I'm a huge gold bull, and I think the price action has been phenomenal, because if you told me that the US dollar, the Dixie, was going to have this type of rally up just since July, and that gold would basically be flat to slightly negative, I would have said you're crazy. Gold's going to be down in the 1800s, maybe the 1700s with this type of rally. The fact that gold is held up so much, to be honest, it tells me there's big institutional accumulation, and we know that central banks are also loading a boat. And remember, folks, these are the people that are printing all the money, and they know they're going to have to print in the future. So if they're buying gold, it's probably a good indicator that we need to. And just to show my point about the strength in gold, the dollar today is up very nicely, making a multi-month high. And if we go to gold's chart, gold is basically flat on the day, right? So again, to me, that's outperformance on gold. It shows you buyers are coming in even with the dollar strength. Yeah, so the chart on the dollar, to me, is whether it goes a little higher or not, that's up in the air. But I think we're coming to the end of the run. I think as soon as the economic data starts to weaken, the dollar will start to fall very, very quickly. And almost like the Russell, right? It's not quite like the Russell, but you can make a case that you have essentially this sideways pattern from this high, which again is bearish, and we're right at the higher end of that area. So again, there could be a little bit more upside in the dollar, but I actually have it priced out that in the next year, you're probably going to start to break lower and even eventually get below this 100 level where we made the low back in July. So again, that adds to my bias for gold even more, and maybe eventually Bitcoin, when Bitcoin isn't such a risk asset, that it really can outperform. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the dollar comes in here from these levels.